Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to Stories of Inclusion. This is Kelli McLoud-Schingen coming to you with a very special guest, Dr. Dave Lewis. He's a friend and a colleague and one of the most kind, gentlest, most brilliant people I know, and I am delighted to have him with us here today. Hey, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am super happy. Everybody knows that these stories of inclusion gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what brings people to the work of inclusion if they don't even know that they're doing, quote, inclusion work, but are just
Mm,
inclusive people, inclusive leaders. I remember Dave and I met when I was working at Texas A&M University, some time ago, and we connected over our brother and sisterhood.
mhm.
I am, hey now. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So Dave is my fraternity brother. He is a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and I am a Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated member. And so we connected and resonated over that, and not just that connection, but also our care for our students of color, specifically at Texas A&M, and trying to make sure that we were giving space for them to be their full selves.
Mhm.
So, welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so happy that you're here. So, listen, let's just jump straight on into it, my friend.
Okay.
So, tell me, how on earth, how on earth did you get here, right? So, tell us your story. Tell us
Okay.
who you are, where you came from, who your people are, all that stuff. Just
Right.
tell us
Right.
a story.
Tell us the story. Well, my story, it's interesting being in diversity and inclusion work because I think I'm that. I'm the product of that. I'm originally from Trinidad, and just starting from the basics in terms of my own makeup.
Mm,
Folks see me and typically categorize me as African American, and that's fine.
mhm.
The interesting part is coming from Trinidad, my mother comes from a Carib background, so the native peoples of the Caribbean. So my great grandmother was full Carib. And
Oh,
then my grandmother was the result of Carib and British. And then my grandmother married someone from India. So my mom's side, you have this broad spectrum of individuals from different backgrounds and ethnicities. And
yeah.
then on my dad's side, oh gosh, I'm just going to break it down real quick. It's French, it's Portuguese, it's Dutch, and it's African. And
Oh,
so, there is this respect and understanding for all of those pieces. Yes,
mhm,
the histories, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there is something about understanding that we are people that are of this earth, made of this earth,
mhm,
and belong to this earth. And
mm,
so, there are divisions and there are all these different rainbows in there. But I think that my ethnic background allowed me to have that lens to really see things from different perspectives. And so once I got to college and I went to an HBCU, Morehouse College, that gave me a deeper understanding of the value of one's background, one's story, one's being, one's people, one's
mm,
community.
mhm,
And that really rooted me on this journey because it pulled everything that I was and contextualized it and then
mhm.
gave me the wheels and the I guess the tools to a certain extent to really start. The interesting part is you don't know that you're doing this. It's not like you sit down one day and say, I want to do this. It's
Right.
just a natural flow and then it just kind of took off from there.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. Listen, you know, you speak of coming from, Trinidad, and that being your identity, and that some people confuse you with being African American.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of African Americans don't really understand what it means to be Black from a different context. Would you agree with that?
It does, I like to talk about Du Bois's double consciousness for the African American story in itself. You
Hmm.
have that two-ness of the Negro, as he called it back then, the wording from back then. But you
Hmm.
talk about that idea of being American and also being African.
Right.
What I like to tell people is that basically you had the ship coming from Africa with all the slaves. They drop half of the cargo in the Caribbean, and then they drop the other half of the cargo in America. So
Right.
it's not like we're not connected. It's that
Yeah.
our stories kind of, those storybooks where you could say, if you do this, go to chapter 4. If you do this, go to chapter 6.
Right.
It's kind of that same thing. So we're connected in that journey. Um, I like to
Hmm.
say, I have an extra lens, so I call it, triple consciousness,
Yeah.
in that I am of African descent, period.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
am Black in America. And
Yeah.
I have lived the majority of my life in the United States and understand the context of being categorized as an African American.
True.
Although I may not have had the K through 12 experience. But it also gives me, as an immigrant, another lens to be able to look at society from almost a distance.
Hmm.
Not that I don't feel the same hurts and the same joys that African Americans feel. And in fact, what it has really given me is a lens to respect their strength,
Hmm.
respect what they have and still are enduring in the United States. And so it provides for me a context of being part of, but also being just slightly away, that it gives me a different vantage point to really understand the experience. So I think it provides perspective, a really good perspective. And I tell a lot of my African American brothers and sisters, if they could see what I see, y'all would be triply proud of what y'all have accomplished. And it's not a you or us,
Right.
but understanding, looking at you from a different perspective. African Americans may not necessarily understand their greatness in context because of what the history in the United States have been.
Right. Listen, thank you for that. And I think that one of the things that I was just telling somebody or posting something the other day on Facebook about um, the Viewmaster. You remember the thing that you could click the
Yeah.
finder?
Uh-huh.
I found out that it was an African American man who invented this thing, this toy
Mhm.
that we all enjoyed so much. And I was saying how
Right.
if you enjoyed this thing growing up, then you need to thank Black Magic and
Mhm.
and kind
Mhm.
of basically challenge your narrative, right? Because
Right.
if at the end of the day, people would think that we only contribute, in terms of sports and music.
Right.
So our academic achievements and our inventions and whatnot aren't things that people know very well. So that reminder is something that always gives me a great deal of pride anyway. You know what I'm saying? So just
Right.
feeling good about where we came from and what we had to overcome in order to have access to some of that stuff. And just imagine if there weren't those barriers, societal barriers, what we
Exactly.
truly could achieve and the benefit to everybody, not just us, but the benefit to everybody, right?
Mhm.
So, but don't let me get up on my platform because that's here
Well,
for
well,
another.
and I know you have something to say, but it was interesting. Just this morning, I found out that the spark plug was invented by an African American, and so it's those little things. And one of the things that I say for myself is, I hope everybody who stops at a traffic light understands that that was invented by an African American. So
Yeah,
in our daily lives, we don't even readily recognize
yeah, yeah.
the the, the contributions that African Americans have made,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and that goes into the whole idea of storytelling.
Right? Doesn't it? I mean, and
Yeah.
that's the thing that, and one of the most powerful lines in Hamilton, to me, Hamilton the music was,
Uh-huh.
who lives to tell your story, who gets to tell your
Mhm.
story, right?
Mhm.
Because um there is power in who controls the narrative.
Hmm.
And if we don't control our narrative, then those stories become concealed and marginalized and lost.
Exactly.
So there's something so incredibly important by being able to not just um, to know our stories,
Hmm.
but to actually tell our stories, because there's
Hmm.
something liberating and empowering in that. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Yes, definitely. One of the things that is really important is for us to self-define.
Mm,
You know, we have so many different contexts that invade our space and try to tell us who we are and what we are and how we should walk and how we should dress and what we should do.
hmm
How little time do we take to reflect on who we are and the things that make us happy regardless of those external forces? So self-definition,
hmm
we talk about self-actualization, self-definition, as we look at the United States in itself, you know, uh, we're African American, we're
hmm
Afro American,
hmm
we're Black, we're Negro, and there are other words that were developed to express who we are.
Yeah.
Understanding that, how much participation did we have
Mm,
in even developing our own nomenclature? Little to
mm,
none. I look at the Hispanic community, and you use that term, Hispanic.
mhm,
That is a term created by the Census Bureau. And so
mhm.
when you talk to someone, I mean, today we kind of understand what quote unquote that grouping is, but you talk to someone who is a Chicano
Mm,
in LA, and you talk to somebody who's Mexican in San Antonio, and
mhm.
then you talk to the Dominican in New York, and then you talk to the Cubano in Miami, and you say, well, y'all all Hispanic. No, no. And so we have to look at
Right.
self-definition and how do we tell our own stories and how do we define ourselves?
Right. And it's so critical, wouldn't you say? I mean, I remember when I was I grew up on the south side of Chicago, right? People have heard this be my mantra. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Anybody who will listen. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And the reason why that's important to me is because in my opinion, defines me. It helps to define me. If you understand that at all, then you begin to understand a little bit about who it is that I am. Now, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you understand all that it is that I am, because I
Right,
have been out of Chicago for a long
right.
time now, and I've been out of Chicago, out of the South Side even longer. So, um, so I think that what's important is why it's foundational to me, and
Mhm,
it is important to the core of who it is that I am. It's not all that I am. So if
mhm,
people want to reduce me to that singularity, then that
mhm.
becomes problematic. But if you take a piece of that to begin to understand me, um,
Exactly.
right? Then
Exactly.
you'll come just a little bit closer to understanding my perspective, how I see things, how I'm impacted by things, why certain things are more important to me, why I'm more sensitive about certain things than other things,
Mhm,
etc. You know,
mhm,
so um, so well, let's just get into it, because we've already talked a little bit about story and the
mhm.
power that story has.
Right.
So when did you come to understand the power of story, and how did you start using it in academia or even your personal life, and just in what ways have you used story, right?
Right. Well, for me, there are two places that stories, and I'll make this story short because I could go on forever, but there are two people and places that really made me start to question or start to be critical about, you know, who's telling our story. And the first person is Paul Keynes Douglas, who's a poet from Trinidad. And you know, there's this poem, and of course, I'm going to forget the name of it right now. But it's about cricket, and it's about West Indian cricket, and my pads buckled tight and held high, and it was this moment of Caribbean pride, Trinidadian pride. that occurred in his story and
Mm.
in his voice and
Hmm.
in how he projected who we were as a people. The second person is Charles Ward, Professor Charles Ward. He was my history professor at Morehouse. And of course, you go into these history classes expecting to hear, well, King George did this and Queen Elizabeth did this. And there was that part, but he took the time to talk to us
Hmm.
about African civilization
Hmm.
and how it evolved and our connectivity to that. And when we speak our story, it doesn't start from only a slave ship, but it starts prior to that.
Mm.
So those two moments for me were enlightening, if you want to use that term. But it flipped the switch for me when I said, "Who am I?
Hmm.
Who am I?" Because the story starts with you. That's the thing. No one can tell your story. And so I started to see books on African history, not written by African people. I started to see all these Caribbean history books written by British people. And I went, and I would read about Caribs and Arawaks in the Caribbean, and the Caribs were fierce, and the Arawaks were fierce. And I was like, they were sitting on the island chilling, you know. And so, who are you to come in and superimpose your perspective on what this is to these people? You ask the Carib is like, I was chilling by the sea when you pulled up with a boat. So, who's telling our story becomes really important.
Mm.
And so, for me, one of the things that I do in my course, and there are a lot of things, you know, I would say my entire repertoire, if you want to use that term, of my career, of my research, of my teaching.
Hmm.
And I always hesitate with the word teaching because I see it as an educational exchange.
Sure.
Because, you know, let me back up. A lot of my work has to do with self reflection,
Hmm.
even if it's a history course, even if it's um, a student development course. We have to reflect on who we are in the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
These things are not independent of us. So for me, storytelling narratives are very important. And what I really grew to understand in the field is that people of color in particular, and we could get into gender as well, but I'll just stick with people of color, their stories were being told by others.
Mm.
And then when we read books that were written by people of color, there was a sort of are they second to these other sets of the canon?
Ah.
But I found those books to be more authentic to the culture for which it was representing. And
Yes.
so for me, I started to say, these are the counter stories that are being marginalized, that are not being brought up to the canon. And you know, I put my voice in that tone because they're the, you know, it, they're looked upon as secondary. They're looked
Right.
upon as tertiary. They're looked
Mhm.
upon as not really adding to the conversation. And my response to that was no. These are legitimate voices that need to be heard, that need to be represented. I'm not saying it has to be the only voice. I'm not saying throw away the canon. I'm
Mm.
saying if we're going to look and explore and understand any group, any community, any population, then we have to look at it from the multiple sides. I always use this example, and it's outside of education, but you know, when you go to the doctor with a child, if you have a child and they have to go for shots,
Mhm.
and the child is scared out of their mind of the shot. They're crying. And what does the doctor say? The doctor says, it's just going to be a pinch.
Yeah.
Right? But to the child, their lived experience is one of pain, is
Mhm.
one of fear. And because of the size, the whatever and the lack of understanding sometimes of the greater context, it is excruciating to them.
Yeah.
And who are we to now squelch that expression of excruciating pain to just say it's a pinch? And so the same thing happens in academia, where voices of color are usually sidelined and say, oh, well, yeah, they're nice, however.
Mm.
And so it becomes this really interesting battle where we have individuals of color trying to express the story and they're being delegitimized by the larger field. So for me, I continue to push that because these are authentic voices. These are voices that are telling their story. And it's not about agreeing with the story or disagreeing, but it's allowing individuals to tell their story.
Dave, I mean, I could just shout right now, frankly, because I think that when I first had an opportunity and college was honestly probably the first time that I remember, right, reading um, a book that really spoke to my heart about my story and my experience, written by an African American person. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that and I'm pretty sure that I had access, right? I was I went to all black schools all the way through high school, and most of them were named for African American notables in our
Mhm.
experience, right? Percy L. Julian, um,
Mhm.
was my high school where I went to, and he was a scientist, right? So
Okay.
so the thing is that I know that I had access to people who made contributions in that way, but it was the literary contributions that
Mhm.
was severely lacking in my upbringing, right? We spent a lot of time, Mark Twain, whom I enjoy, I won't take anything away from
Right.
him,
Right.
Shakespeare, who I enjoy,
Mhm.
I won't take nothing away from it. But
Mhm.
you know, um, I didn't know about folks like Nikki Giovanni, or the only reason why I knew about W.B. Du Bois was because of my uncle, who was a Black Panther member,
Right.
and and he was like, "Look, yeah, I'm gonna tell you about Black people. I'm gonna let you know the real truth, right?" But
Mhm.
those types of lessons came from family. It didn't come from
Mhm.
academia. It didn't come from my education until I took a African American Studies course in college,
Right.
and and so I my children go to or went to a high school here in town that had an incredibly rigorous international baccalaureate program, the IB
Mhm.
program, right? So the history that they have to take is, European history, or, US history, and
Mhm.
the upper level AP versions of that.
Right.
And when I said, I thought you guys had an African American history course, and they both were like, yeah, but it's not in the IB program,
Mhm.
right? So what ends up happening is that when kids have an opportunity to make a choice at their school,
Right.
they're all more than likely, unless they are African American, are not going to choose the African American history class, right?
Mhm.
That may be my bias, it may be my assumption, but
Mhm.
based on experience, right? I
Mhm.
I know that has been true. So being able to have access and to be in control of our own narrative is something that
Mhm.
is incredibly important. And I can kind of get off, but the whole this notion of like Kwanzaa and things like that,
Mhm.
the ability for us to see ourselves
Mhm.
um, is is so incredibly important when a society tells you that you're not good enough, right? So James Baldwin said that the only thing you're told about being black is that it is a terrible thing to be, right?
Right.
And so, and for me, much of my life, that was true, even for people who look like me, right?
Right.
We never wanted to be the darkest black person in the room, right? But that's a whole nother piece.
And
But
colorism is a whole other conversation when we talk about colonization. So that's a whole other conversation. Woo.
baby, listen,
Mm.
and I always say, and that's something that is true for every conquered, colonized, or enslaved people.
Right.
So that color complex that, I am better than if I have I
Hmm.
will get greater access to opportunity if I
Hmm.
look like them, right? If I
You're less
behave like them.
feared. Yep, you're less feared.
Yep.
Um, you're one of those better ones. And when you talk about better here, we
Yep.
have all these words that we use in our society that we don't really realize. And that's one of the things we will talk about at some juncture. We're talking about, colonized language,
Yeah.
colonized perceptions that are inbred or interwoven, probably is the better term, interwoven into society that we don't even recognize.
Right.
And that's where that, oh my gosh, where did that come from? You know,
Yeah.
and we pass it on generationally. And so, I did an exercise, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, go ahead.
a lot of these things are so subliminal, and
Hmm.
so far in the past. So, for instance, we're speaking English right now. That's a colonized language.
Come
Okay,
on.
so we need to talk about that. So I did an exercise in my class, and I teach this Bob Marley class that you and I spoke about. But I did this exercise where basically I was the colonizer, and the majority of my students were white and Mexican American, majority white, but a few Mexican Americans. And the interesting part was not necessarily going in and changing their names and changing their religion and changing their food and changing their music and telling them what they need to do. There was one person like, well, I am a banker or whatever, and I say, yeah, now you're gonna go across here and cut some sugar cane, right? So being again that whole idea of uprooting you from what you are to do
Mm.
this next thing,
Yeah.
we talked about that, and there was this, oh my gosh. And then I said, think about it, if that's perpetuated 5 generations from now,
Yeah.
your religion, your language, your belief system, your food, your music, your
Mm.
sense of being is now translated into this other framework that was not even designed for by you.
Mm.
And so all of us, when we think about colonization, it's not just the getting there, but it's the perpetuation, the generational perpetuation. And we lose everything. And all of a sudden, we're using phraseology, terminology, words, was, you know, gesticulations that aren't even ours. And so the idea of even utilizing
Mm.
language and definitions
Mm.
that weren't created by you
Mm.
to define who you are is such another layer of the importance of this idea of counter storytelling.
Whew.
Because we're still, no matter what, we're still framed and limited. And folks will say, so then what do you do? Well, here's the deal. You make the best of where you are,
Hmm.
right? But like you said, that idea of seeing and having the opportunity to hear the words or the language or how we do things. You go to the Caribbean and you see folks going, hey, and you go, hey, I kind of like that. And there's a freedom that comes with it. Because there's a self-definition in there. And there's that idea of that I've told my story, I'm proud of who I am, and I don't need your validation to tell me who I
Mm. You about to make me get up here and shout.
am.
Listen, and thank you for saying that too, right? So there's a tool that I use in my work around storytelling for social justice,
Mhm,
and there are four story models. One is called a stock story, which is the
mhm,
dominant and mainstream story. The second one is called the concealed stories, and they're usually from the marginalized people alongside the stock story. And then
mhm,
one is called the stories of resistance, right? Usually wrapped up in a movement like,
mhm,
BLM or civil rights or,
mhm,
women's suffrage. Um, and then when we go through all of those stages and the marginalized story pushes into the resistance story, then we create a counter narrative, right?
mhm,
Now, that's the way that this method works. But I know that you have created a story method around counter narratives, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about that, Dave, because this is what this for me is the meat and potatoes of our conversation today. So tell us about that.
Okay. The terminology again, I use for it as a collaborative, reflexive narrative analysis. And
Okay.
basically, it is a way in which, and this is the very direct way of saying it, and then I'll get into some other technicalities. It is us telling our stories,
Hmm.
infusing our cultural lenses within those experiences, and being critical enough to really dig deeper into what the meanings of those experiences are. And
Mm.
it provides two levels. One, it provides the platform for us to share our lived experiences, but it also provides our meaningfulness to what that occurrence is. Because the real interesting part is that something would occur to you and somebody say, well, just get over it.
Right.
But there's so much cultural entanglement in that lived experience
Hmm.
and so much meaningfulness to a larger societal extent. We are key informants to our own lives.
Yeah.
Nobody could tell you what your experiences mean. Now, what that process also does is allow us not only to be the primary data holders, as it were, it also allows us to critically analyze who we are and what those meanings mean.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that literally everything that comes out of my mouth, I'll say, well, that's valid or whatever the term you want to use. But it provides a space for us to sit and look at our reflections and be reflexive
Hmm.
to tease out what is the authentic cultural voice and interpretation of our lived experiences are. And it's rooted in Nash's scholarly personal narrative. It has some ethnography in there.
Hmm.
Solozano and Yoso does some counter storytelling in there. And so what it does, it utilizes, Lincoln and Guba, we could get into that. It really provides a plural positionality for us.
Mm.
We are the storyteller and we're also the meaning makers. Because one of the biggest problems in research is that we do the storytelling and then someone external of us with no cultural context decide to decode, to code, to theme, to analyze, to make sense of, and they do not have 9 out of 10 times the cultural capital to make sense of our lived experiences.
Hmm.
And so we as key informants could also be critical and critique our own experiences. You hear people say, I really hate to hear my voice whenever I have it recorded, right? Well, that's us critiquing ourselves. We're not hearing our voices and automatically going, oh, that is wonderful, right? Most of the time, we're pretty self-conscious and we critique. So it's not that it doesn't have the rigor. Of course, I'm not getting into all the technicalities of trustworthiness and the cyclical model in which the analysis takes place. But
Mm.
I think what's most important is we discount our cultural capital. We discount our cultural makeup in the interpretation and meaning making of our lives. Here's the interesting point. If we're even using, like we said literally 5 minutes ago, we're using a colonized language, our
Hmm.
meaning is already out the door, halfway.
Right.
And now we take ourselves out of the analysis process. Now we're flapping in the wind.
Mm.
And so when we look at the idea of this collaborative, reflexive narrative analysis, you have to understand that what you're bringing to the table is not only your experiences, but you're bringing your culture, to the table to make authentic meaning of what this means in the larger social context. It's these stories that are not heard, and I shared this with you
Mm-hmm.
some time ago, and I'll do a short version of this. When Ahmaud Arbery was killed,
Mm-hmm.
and my son, who's 12, wanted to walk literally 5 blocks from where we're living, said, "Dad, could I go up to the elementary school and play some basketball?" The fear that gripped me about him wanting to go 5 blocks.
Hmm.
How do you contextualize that?
Hmm.
How do you tell somebody who's not part of your culture the trepidation that you experience
Hmm.
when that occurs? Oh, that won't happen to your son.
Right.
Well, the propensity of that occurring, especially me living in a neighborhood where I'm the only one on the block and one of only 3 families in my subdivision, where folks may not necessarily know us, the propensity is he could be criminalized. How do we tell that story? How do we express that to the larger society to understand our experiences? Because that is something, because here's the interesting part. We've had friends who are white who would say, I never thought about that with my son. Therefore, it's not a lived or cultural experience that you are aware of. How could you analyze my lived experience? And
Right.
just within that small example is truly the quote unquote justification for why this cultural self, authentic cultural narrative process is necessary.
Listen, um, I couldn't agree. Excuse me. I couldn't agree more. Right. I think that us having control of our own narrative is critical. And look, is my sound still good?
No, I'm hearing you well.
Okay, because I'm getting some kind of wonky robot sound in my headset. So, but I want to show this comment from Nick. Nick says, "Yes!" Exclamation point. So, I clearly this is an idea or a concept that resonates with a lot of people. We have to have control of our own narrative. We have to be able to tell our own story from our own perspective through our own lenses, and if you have not lived, right, it's a walk a mile in my shoes. Well, that's almost impossible, you know. If not, it is impossible. But what I find is that if I'm going to bring you closer to understanding my experience, what I ask is that you simply listen
Mhm,
instead of telling me who I am, instead of telling me what my experience is, instead of telling me how I have uh, interact or how I do interact with our systems, our policies, our structures, our legal system, etc. So so being a good listener, and right now I'm using more of the language of being a story listener,
mhm,
right? For the last several years for probably 15 years I've been talking about storytelling, but in the last 3 to 4 years it's been story listening, because I think that that's what people need, that skill, right? We talk about being an active listener, but being able to be a true story listener means that my story can transform you. And because stories, you and I know that stories can put us in a trance, right? It puts us in the
mhm.
type of place where I am no longer in this time and space. I am in the time and space of your story, which means that I become transfixed, right? And as a result, your story has the ability to transform me. And so I think that in be, we need to train people to be better listeners so that experience can happen, that to be on the other side of someone's story and be changed by it, right?
And I will even go one up, which is as you are listening, do not, do not superimpose your paradigm on me.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the biggest things that because we are who we are based upon our experiences, etc., our communities, etc. And so I'm not saying that you won't have those vestiges. You all have those vestiges. But one of the things we have to be very careful about when we're listening is not to translate what you're hearing from someone into your own framework. My paradigm is not your paradigm. And your paradigm is not my paradigm. So we have to be very careful. And that's where that criticality comes in, where I think to a certain extent there's never a 100% exchange, term. Because how do you now tell someone who's not just personally, maybe their entire community have never even experienced what your community has experienced? So we have to be very careful. And that's where the respect comes in. That's where asking the questions come in. That's where instead of, and I'll be honest, this is one of my favorite sentences. I don't know. Being able to be humble enough to come to somebody and say, I really don't know about this. However, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to understand as far as my paradigm allows me to listen. And I'm willing to try and gather so that I'm informed and have this cultural exchange. But I'm not going to superimpose my paradigm on you. And when they're listening, that is the biggest thing. Because unfortunately, we don't just have filters here, we have filters here.
So I'm a little concerned because Nick says that there's the sound is not good. So I'm not really sure what's going on with our sound. Hold on, let me see if I can do a couple of things here. Can you still hear me well, Dave?
Yes.
There's definitely some kind of feedback issues, and I'm not really sure what's going on. But let's see if we can keep going. I apologize, everyone, for the feedback problems that we're having. Hopefully, it'll clear up shortly. But because this is some really good, juicy stuff, I want to make sure that you guys can get it all. So let's see what we can do here. Okay. So Dave, you don't have like an Apple iPhone headset thing, perhaps that you? Huh?
Not in this office. Not in this office. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. We don't want you to walk away. So, well, let's continue to go forward, and hopefully we can tough through the sound issues. So again, apologies.
And I'll mute myself once I'm not talking.
Okay, awesome. That's fantastic. So then, I know that you have this fantastic opportunity coming up with Fulbright. And I really, okay, sorry, I just saw another message from Nick. He says it's readable and I did grasp a lot by listening harder. So thank you for listening harder, Nick. And yes, if people are watching, there are subtitles on Facebook, so that'll be helpful for some of the sound issues. But okay, so I'm excited to know more about this Fulbright opportunity. So tell us all about it.
Okay. Well, I'll start where it was birthed. Basically, in April of next year, I'll be going to the University of Bremen, which is in northern Germany, to work with their international graduate school, specifically engineering and logistics division, and working with their students. And they have a very diverse population, international graduate school. And how it was birthed, and I'll get back to what I'll be doing, but how it was birthed was actually a collaboration with myself and a number of faculty here. I'll say here, I also teach at Texas Tech. And so I'm in the College of Education and collaborating with College of Engineering. And we wrote a grant to work with Jamal University in Ethiopia. So we developed a number of degree programs at Jamal and was working collaboratively with them. One of the things that is decided somewhere in the middle is that students needed, I don't know what word I would use, an international experience. So we partnered with the University of Raymond. And so these Ethiopian students traveled to Raymond in summer. And I went up in the summer to teach them. And I was teaching basically technical writing, dissertation level writing, publication writing, thesis writing. And so working with these Ethiopian students, we did that for 3 years. And by the second year, the Germans were like, hey, this is great. And all of a sudden, my classes weren't just Ethiopian students, but Ethiopian and German students. I should say students who are attending this German university. But I had students from Asia, I had students from Polynesia, I had students from different parts of Europe, and so it became this really diverse class. And especially Deutsch ein bisschen. So I tried to even bring a little bit of my own German into the class, understanding the context where we were. So okay, all of that is to sort of set the tone. So I leave, and mentoring is also part of my research agenda. And so I was mentoring some of these students for the time that I was there. So then the University of Bremen reached out to me and said, hey, let's do a Fulbright application, see if we can get you up here for a while to teach a couple of courses in intercultural communication, mentoring, work with our faculty, work with our students, and also develop some policy and strategy for the international graduate school that could really provide some sort of cultural foundation and some, folks say cultural competence training for faculty. And so that's what I'll be doing. I'll be teaching courses and also doing workshops with faculty, doing talks on diversity, inclusion, the necessity of diversity in higher education. So I'll be doing that from April till about July next year. And basically, I'll be a lecturer at the University of Raymond, a researcher, and I guess sort of an administrative consultant of sorts. So that's kind of what I'll be doing next year in Raymond. Kelly, you're frozen.
Look, and I don't know what's going on. Hopefully, this will clear up. There's some kind of problem with our service here. So, listen, I that sounds amazing. First, I think that that's going to be quite the treat for your students. But I'll go further to say, I think that it is going to be one of those life-altering encounters and experiences for you, and for you to be able to come back and tell your kids about this fantastic experience. Hopefully, they'll be able to come for a little while and spend some time with you, so that they don't have to be without dad for so long.
Well, they'll be coming up in May after my oldest graduates from high school. The entire family is going to be coming back because I'll come for like a week for graduation, and then they'll come up May, June, and July.
I love that. That's okay. So we have time for just one more question. I can't believe that time has flown so fast, so quickly. Um, but so yeah, tell me what's next? What's up next for Dave? I know that we're in this really wonky space for, COVID impacting, the way that we teach.
Mhm.
But what else is going on? What else is next for Dave? So tell us what's happening.
Well, on a career level, I've just been appointed as the interim associate dean of the Honors College. And one big charge of that is for me to engage in diversity and inclusion work at the college level and also at the university level. And so one of the things that I've been charged with, and I like the wording even in the contract and our discussion, they're like, what is social justice and what does it mean to our students? So it continued with my teaching. I'm teaching a course right now, the history of higher education through the lens of student activism. And so, really understanding our place and our voices in the higher ed context. So now what's next for me is, taking this platform on an ongoing basis, not just in a couple articles or talks, but really now I'm expanding to where uh, I will be part of discussions in terms of campus climate here at the institution, and really working not so much on policy, even though I think I will have some place in that, but really working with larger populations of students on developing their voice and their understanding of what social justice is and their place as citizens and individuals who live in the United States, and that their voices are important and their perspectives are important. So I think my next step is being a facilitator for developing voices of more students, more young adults as they grow into leadership, letting them have an understanding of what social justice is, but also letting them understand what is their responsibility, letting them understand that, as individuals who may be of color, and what to do with their experiences, individuals who are white, what is their responsibility to learn and understand their society around them. So really, we'll see where this goes. It's a lifelong journey, and the interesting part is that I'm not trying to dictate the path, because the path is going to dictate what I need as an individual to grow. And the opportunities that are presented to me, I will be grateful for them, and I will learn what I have to learn there, and add it to my toolbox and add it to who I am. And, you know, uh, the journey is one that is spiritual, is one that is organic. I don't define myself by titles, but I also understand the responsibility of titles and the platforms that I may have in educating people and educating myself, because that continues till the minute you put me 6 feet under. So we'll see what happens next.
Well, listen, Dave, it's always great to hear from you,
Thank you.
to chat with you, to engage with you. I feel like not only do I enjoy myself having a conversation with an old friend, but I always feel like I learn so much from you too. So I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for talking to us today, for sharing your story, for being here, and to give us a little bit a peek into the way you do what you do and why that's important. So thanks so much for coming out today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I know we'll continue to talk. And again, just keep being as authentic as we can be, and that's going to take us where we need to be.
Absolutely. Very, very true. So I want to thank everybody who took the time to join us today. We appreciate you sticking with us through our sound difficulties. Um, I just want to end by sharing one of my favorite quotes, which is it's a Chinese parable, or which is, culture is a treasure that will follow its owner everywhere. I truly believe that story is a treasure that will follow its owner everywhere. So treasure stories, treasure people, and treasure culture. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Again, I want to thank you so much, Dave. Oh, you got somebody saying, uh, look at my classmate, Alicia Allison. Hey now. So again, thank you all for coming out. If you want more information about Dave, Dave, where can people find you? Do you have a Twitter account, LinkedIn, something like that?
You can find me on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
Dave A. Louis, PhD. I'm there, and feel free to drop me a note there, or you could email me at dave.louis@ttu.edu.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much fully and completely giving of your time and your talent today. I appreciate you as my friend. I appreciate you as my brother. I appreciate you as my teacher. So, whoop, hey now. So again, thank you so much for coming out. Thanks to all of you for listening. Join us next time. In just about 2 weeks, my next guest is going to be Dr. Eddie Moore, and Eddie is the founder of the White Privilege Conference. And so we'll be having an opportunity to chat with Eddie about what that journey was like and what brings him to that place and what's happening now that the conference can't be in person. So we thank you all for being here. We will see you next time. Really appreciate you. Dave, can you hang around?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Thank you all for showing.